Jai Guru, everyone.
Hey,
Jai
Guru.
Guru.
Hello, welcome to Looking on the podcast. We're on chapter 22 and the third and final part of this chapter. I'm with Chris and Michael. How are you two?
Very
Excellent.
well.
Very
Ready
good.
to go.
Very good. He
Yes,
says,
already.
scrubbing his eyes from tiredness, all the gym work.
Mm.
Chris, tell us about the previous episode.
So in the previous episode, we looked at a really interesting divine moment that Mukunda shared, Yogananda shared with us from his years as Mukunda. There was a prayer that Mukunda made to Divine Mother. He was answered by Divine Mother, and he had this experience where he had the ability to see through buildings. He could see very far into the distance, people working in fields and things like that. Had a very etherical texture to his body. He talked about the withdrawal of the breath, the stillness of the body, and the coming to life of the stone figure of the goddess Kali. So it was a really in-depth moment that we got to witness through the reading. And we ended it with the rather abrupt ending of the brother-in-law, where he came rushing towards Mukunda, shaking his fist in anger. So that's where we left off. We're going to see that the prayer that Mukunda made to ask Divine Mother to help his brother-in-law was answered, and we're going to hopefully see the turnaround of fortune in the brother-in-law's fate.
What's the brother-in-law said's name?
It's funny you were going to ask me that because I thought to myself, I should really remind myself what it's called. So my intuition was bang on there, but my preparation was
Mike,
zero.
what's his name?
Satish.
Thank you.
You
Thank
can
you.
always rely on Mike's memory. It's a machine.
Yeah,
Like a
He's
machine.
machine
he's
learning
Mhm.
machine.
he's
Mhm.
like my god of suits.
Mhm. That's right. I know all the laws memorized here.
So Satish, like with fist, you kind of I remember in the last episode, but he calls him a little fool, and he says you've been sitting there cross-legged and cross-eyed for hours, which kind of means that Mukunda had his eyes. He was doing his scary meditation where like he had his eyes half open, looking toward the center eye.
That kind of confirms what I thought in last episode, where I was thinking, like, what is Satish doing during those hours and hours at the temple ground? If you're not interested in spirituality, there's not much to do for you. So he was probably just waiting and waiting and waiting for time to pass by and being anxious about getting lunch or not.
Mhm. People watching. Indian temples are a
People
great
watching.
place to do people watching. Great place, especially the big ones like this one, because there's so much happening in different parts of the temple. There's like so many different categories of visitor and devotee that it's fun to people watch. And he says, "I've gone back and forth watching you." So he's basically been stomping the ground. But it's good because at least he didn't, even though he was clearly a frustrated man, he didn't actually disturb Mukunda in his samadhi, and therefore he avoided the bad karma that would have come about out of that. So good man, Satish, even before his transformation. So he asks Mukunda and demands, "Where is our food? The temple's closed now, and you failed to notify the temple authorities to arrange our lunch. It's too late." I think I told you in the past that going to, as I said, there's various categories of devotee that go to the temples, and people that go for the food is one category. If people that principally go for the fine lunches is a common one, I must say. But so it's a happy benefit. I know my wife hates this, well, not hates, dislikes this category of devotee such an extent that she never eats at her temple in Neasden. Even though they have like some phenomenal food, she'll religiously not eat unless pinned down.
To my shame, I must say, I went to a Bab's temple recently here in LA, for the time when they served food because I wanted to try it.
Sorry, Satish, I didn't realize you changed your name. Did you stomp the ground?
That's right. Like,
Waiting
where's my
for
food?
your-
Yeah,
But no, the
that's
food
right.
in the BAPS temple in LA and Easton. No, it's great.
Very good.
It's to
And vegetarian.
yes, yes.
Mhm.
So yeah, he says it's too late to arrange that lunch, and Mukunda says something a little bit profound here. He says, "The exaltation I had felt in Goddess's presence lingered with me." Now, I really like this line because I have had just a few handful of experiences where I can completely relate to this. I remember when this first happened, I was really drunk in Kailash, actually, Chris, and I was volunteering as well during the time, and so I was facing the sacred mountain, and I was like eyes half open. I just finished my meditation, and I was just looking, gazing, and then someone came and had to tell me some stuff, and because I was a bit out of it, they were like really like assertive. And in any other walk of life, I would have like, responded in kind. But because I was in this state, similar to what Mukunda says, where, he's in that state of exaltation, and that feeling lingers, and there's nothing that can happen that could take you out of that state, because it's such a divine state, and you know that everything else is mundane. There should be nothing in existence that should take you away from that. So I remember really, really, it was quite funny as well a little bit, because they wanted to like get some sort of reaction from me, but none was forthcoming. So it's pretty cool. Don't know if you guys have experienced this.
Oh, no.
And he says, in this state, exclaims, "Divine Mother will feed us." And Satish is now really annoyed. He says, "Once and for all, I'd like to see your Divine Mother giving us food without arrangements."
It's funny that this really triggered him when Mukunda said that. And what happened next is probably very, it works because this triggers him. So there's like some kind of sore spot in his mind that he really does not want to believe that Goddess or Divine Mother is doing anything for him.
You know,
yeah, go on.
I'm reading a lesson, or I was going over one of the lessons recently, and it reminded me here this passage of something, a line or two that I read in the lessons. Essentially, it was saying that one of the biggest mistakes we make as humans is looking for our joy and everything externally when it's internally. So here, probably Satish wanted to go to him to hear an apology, right? And that would have sort of placated to his, his plight that he was experiencing, sitting there in frustration for so long. And instead of that, he got, more of the go internally, trust the internal. And he was probably seeking the external from his apology from Mukunda here. So Mukunda's tapped into the internal Divine Mother, whereas Satish is sort of running around lost in all the external.
Very true. So he kind of challenges him, doesn't he? Challenges him. He says, "I'd like to see your Divine Mother giving us food." And then his words were hardly uttered, Paramahansa Yogananda writes, when the priest crossed the courtyard, joined us. And you can almost, when Mukunda is being challenged in this way, I don't know about you, but I can almost visualize Divine Mother standing right behind him, like with nothing. We shall not be moved. Kind of, they're a team, aren't they? You can visualize that. And this priest says, "Son, I have been observing your face serenely glowing during meditation for hours. I saw the arrival of your party this morning and felt the desire to put ample food aside for your lunch. Against the rules, but here we are. I've made an exception for you." And Can you imagine the blessings that this lovely priest would have received for this, to be part of this divine plan, and actually to not just be part of it, but to conform to what is required by Guruji here. And this is doubly significant because in the biggest temples in India, of which this is one of the biggest ones, one of the most important and one of the most frequented. The temple priests are, how to put it politely, there is quite because it's so chaotic. They don't really. It's not like a priest that you come, when you go, a minister when you come to a church in the UK or the US, where they want to spend time with you, and they take time outside, out of what they're doing. They'll drop what they're doing and see you and inquire about your family and all this kind of stuff, that niceness that we have, especially from the ministers in SRF. But here it's all in India. It's all very rushed, and it's very transactional. Very few priests will stop what they're doing and do something such as this. Certainly not in the biggest temples. Smaller temples, yes, you'll see it very, very often, but in the big temples, very much this is rare. So that's double significance. So he says, so Mukunda thanked him, and he gazed straight into Satish's eyes. And he doesn't need to say anything, does he? The gaze is enough. And he says, he flushed with emotion, lowering his gaze in silent repentance. And he says, when we were served the lavish meal, including out-of-season mangoes, I noticed that my brother-in-law's appetite was meager. He was bewildered, diving deep into the ocean of thought. Now, what an absolutely sweet moment for everyone involved there. For the priest that put aside the food and saw pretty much what was happening, probably could see their argument brewing, maybe even heard it. So he was part of the resolution of that. For Mukunda, obviously, the scheme is working, the divine plan is being played out. For Roma, who probably would, from afar, would see, certainly if my wife was with me and this kind of thing would happen, she would know what was going on straight away. So she would have known as well, I'm guessing, Roma. And of course for Satish as well, because he's in this deeply reflective mood, and this happens very rarely. And there's no there's no gloating for Mukunda, right? It's just, he lets Satish have this moment of silent remorse and really deep reflection and transformation, which changes everyone involved's lives, including Roma's as well.
It's almost like the transformation of his mind has already happened, and now he's catching up with it, and there's now suddenly a lot to think about.
Indeed. We have to really cherish these moments when they happen, because and journal them. Because I imagine we probably count in one hand how many of these such moments that we have in our lives, and it's all too easy to forget and to put, especially with the course of time, to just put things down to chance and forget the grace that transpired and all the little minute things that happened to make it true.
Yeah, and kudos to Satish for allowing the dam to rupture and for that sort of free flowing of truth to come through, and not sort of build the walls higher and reinforce them and just sort of dig in, because people, we do that as humans. So it reminds me, we talked about it before with atheists, that sometimes the harder they fight, my view, it's kind of like it is the building of the dam. Really, like it's going to break, they're going to and it's things like this that are just undeniable, that God will place in front of us, that one after another will break the dam eventually, and cause the rupture.
There's also something that happens where some devotees like go too much, like far too quickly. Like I don't know if you've experienced this, but they like, you know, the Guruji and the teachings, and then they go all in and they just drop everything. And then for some reason, you know that for some reason that's not sustainable either, because and then they end up going away from this specific path or going away from spirituality altogether. So I feel like it happens in various and different ways, subtle different ways, and it seems to have different impacts, like you say with the dam. So yeah,
which is kind of what happens to Satish in a way here, actually. He kind of goes that way.
But thankfully
Overreacts.
he stays. Thankfully, he has he goes on a spiritual path and stays on it. Thankfully, also we're told by Mukunda or Paramahansa Yogananda. This moment that I speak of in terms of this transformational moments aren't necessarily directly to do with spirituality and guru-disciple relationship as it is here with Satish. It can also be true for every other walk of your life. So in terms of, you know, marriage, for example, or in terms of studies or getting a job, you know, where you end up living, all these other things which kind of aren't, you know, the core purpose of your life, but actually form very strong foundations. I remember when I was young, I was very blasé with my studies. You know, up to the age of 16, I had very, very little concern for the studies, and something really, really jarring happened in my family life. And then I thought, okay, actually, hold on a minute. I need to actually fix up my life, because if I don't, you know, do my studies well, and if I don't get a proper job, then my life is just going to be a chaos from, you know, from now till the end of my life. So I remember that moment very specifically. I remember when it was happening, and you know, there's loads of arguments happening at home and chaos was at home. I went into nature and I really enjoyed the moment of transformation and stayed just with myself. And then my family thought I was you know, reacting really negatively to everything that was happening. So they sent out a search party, and then when they found me, they were, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" I was like, "No." I was like, I'm really fantastic." I could have stayed here for hours, but alas, had to go back. So when I say to journal about it, it's not necessarily just to do with the guru-disciple relationship. It can be many different walks of your life that build the foundation of, you know, where you want to be and the support structure that you need for your spiritual life as well, which is not equally, is important. It's very important, isn't it? If you don't have if you don't have an environment conducive to meditation, then it's much more difficult, isn't it? So you've got to be even thankful for that.
Or the opposite comes to mind with the Buddha, that he had the worlds of luxuries sort of at his feet, and that wasn't good for him either. So there are many people out there that sort of don't have these jarring moments and kind of coast through life as well, because, well, it's easy. So yeah, balance.
With Buddha, I think is it not that he was obviously living a life of luxury, being a prince,
prisoner,
but then he when he went out of his palace, he saw the suffering and he saw someone die and getting cremated and all these things, and then he realized that what a sheltered life I've led, and then he went into his spiritual search. Isn't it? Is that not something like that happened?
Yeah, I suppose my point being is that challenges, difficulties are good, because without them, we almost don't know what we're striving for, right? You know, it's hard to motivate somebody who's got a silver spoon in their mouth and doesn't have to work a day in their life. You know.
Yeah. The life of Saint Francis was very similar, in the sense that he was a prince, and then he noticed how rich he was and how poor everyone on the street was, and then he started giving all these things away. Yeah.
Very good. Yeah. Very good. So on their return journey to Calcutta, Satish had a softened expression, occasionally looked at Mukunda pleadingly, but did not say anything after the moment with the priest and the lovely dinner, as though in answer to Satish's challenge had appeared to invite them for lunch. So the genuflections carried on. And then when they got home, Mukunda visited the next day. Mukunda visited Sister Roma at her home, and she greeted Mukunda affectionately. She said, "Dear brother," she was crying, "what a miracle. Last evening, my husband wept openly before me." And I'm reminded of the chant "Light the Lamp of Thy Love," in particular the line, "Touch me but once and I will change all my clay into thy gold." I really like that line, "Touch me but once and I will change." And it feels like Satish is this chant may have been written for Satish in honor of Satish, because he was just in this subtle way touched. And it is very subtle, isn't it? It's not like a great miracle happened, like materializing a palace in the Himalayas. It was just someone else could have just taken it off, passed it off as chance. The priest just was a nice priest. He prepared our lunch. You're still, Mukunda, you still should have prepared our lunch. You got lucky on this occasion, right? So, but this is not what happened with Satish. He really, was changed, and he really reflected and realized it was God's divine hand, and which is all credit to Satish, of course. And Mukunda says, "Beloved Devi," and Devi is translated in the footnote as goddess or divine mother, you might say, and Divya is like a light, so it's a shining one, which is the Sanskrit root to div. The Sanskrit root is div, or deepam, we also say. So, and Diwali is obviously, of course, that's the festival of lights, and that is also the root from this word div. So he says, so I love that Mukunda doesn't say divine mother or divine sister, or anything else that could be translated into English, because some words in Sanskrit are beyond translation into English. And I think Guruji deems it unsuitable to translate them to English, especially this word here, Devi. So I feel like in this context, he's deliberately kept the Sanskrit, and it makes it a bit more, or a lot more beautiful in my estimation. There's some chants in the cosmic chants where he retains the Sanskrit, especially, for example, when he talks about samadhi in nirvikalpa samadhi. I mean, he could have said in cosmic consciousness, right? But he didn't say that. He kept samadhi, the word, and in the chant I am he keeps certain words like mind, nor intellect, nor ego, chitta. So the word chitta he kept. So there's various chants you can go through, and Hymn to Brahma is also a classic one, where he is the only cosmic chant where he just retains the whole Sanskrit. And I mentioned before that's part of in India, before every meditation they do that chant. So the Sanskrit is particularly important, and it's written in one of the God Talks with Arjuna that some Sanskrit verbs have got such resonance and power that they awaken latent divine memories of our divine, actual divinity. So to say it as it is in Sanskrit helps you to become that. And of course, Guruji has done that in terms of the English chants as well. He says he spiritualized them, right? But some words he's kept. So I feel like it's nice that he's kept beloved Devi here. So he says, I'm happy beyond, this is Satish, sorry, no, this is Mukunda. He says, I'm happy beyond expression that this reforming, oh, no, sorry, this is Satish. Satish says, beloved Devi, I am happy beyond expression that this reforming scheme of your brothers has wrought a transformation. I'm going to undo every wrong I have done to you, and from tonight, we'll use our large bedroom as a place of worship. And your small meditation room shall be changed to our sleeping quarters. Now, I remember, I think I've told you guys when a few years ago when my wife and I were living with my family, I converted the box room into a meditation room, and there was like a real, sorry for international listeners, box room is the smallest room in the house in the UK generally. So we converted that room into a meditation room specifically for meditation, and nothing else in there, no beds, no, bookshelves or nothing. And there was a lot of resistance from my family, and I felt really proud of myself after it, it transpired that, I got the small room as a meditation room, and I've carried on that tradition to the place that we live in now. One of the smallest room out of the three I've kept as a meditation room, but now I feel stupid and guilty because perhaps I should have kept the biggest room as the meditation room, because look at what Satish is infinitely better than I, because he's changed the biggest room and thought nothing of it.
That took him a while. It's a journey, right? It's a journey. Gotta stay flexible.
He was touched and changed, and then he did it straight away. Whereas I've supposedly been on this path for decades.
True. For him, it wasn't a journey, really.
Reflection. You got to reflect on this. I told you I'm refurbing my house, right? And I did say to Karina, I said, why don't we make our big living room the meditation room? Especially we could have a big window facing the garden and have the altar just before that, so you could be facing the garden with the altar there. But it wouldn't have worked, unfortunately. But that would be stunning.
Choose your battles, Priyank.
I visited some devotees in Atlanta a few years ago, and they had a massive house, but the top floor was, I don't know, it was probably as big as my whole apartment, and that was just one big chapel, which I found incredible, and with a real altar and everything. So,
nice,
lovely, lovely. So Satish said, no, it's interesting, isn't it? Because a lot of people, even if they've got this space, I remember, who was I speaking to? I was speaking to someone at the center. Oh yeah, I went to see one of the devotees in her home the other day, an elderly devotee, and she's got a really big house, just like what Mike is saying, and she's kept just the foot, on one corner of her room as the altar. And I said, I thought I'd start a little bit softly. I said, why don't you make this? She's got it's like a 5-bedroom house, massive rooms. I said, why don't you make you see she was using one room just as pretty much a storage room. I said, why don't you just make that your dedicated meditation and altar room? And she said, oh, I get a lot of visitors, so I need to retain the space for sleeping quarters as well. So I think it does take something to actually dedicate a whole space in because especially if you don't have a big space to dedicate your whole room to this meditate to this room. So Satish is quite blessed, and we're reminded that that we talked about other devotees around Mukunda in the ashram and in his school, how they weren't transformed. And we always wondered, how can you see these kind of miracles and be around a Paramahansa Yogananda or a Mukunda or a Swami Yogananda and not completely transform your life? And remember we talked about Sashi, for example, in this case as well, and we couldn't really answer that question. But here we've got an example of what we thought, isn't it, Satish? Like what you would think if you were in the same life or in the same space as Yogananda, you'd completely transform your life. And that's what Satish has pretty much done. He's pretty much the ideal devotee, isn't he, in some ways?
It reminds me a bit of that story. I'm trying to think who it was. First I thought of Saint Therese, but I don't think she was married. I'm not sure if she was, of Lisieux. But there was the story where she was praying for 30 years for her husband to become spiritual. And then after 30 years, he finally turned spiritual and then died 1 year later.
Yeah.
So it's like I think Roma's prayers, they probably are really the good karma that actually made this happen. So I mean, he looked like afterwards there was a lot of spiritual potential in him that got awakened. So maybe that was just the way the karma was supposed to unfold. But it's beautiful to see how when you pray for your partner and then they become more spiritually inclined.
Yeah, my mom has always said until this day that she'll say a prayer for me whenever she goes into church, and I always appreciated it, but now I know the depths of the impact that it's had on me over the years, subtly influencing me, keeping me from falling off the edge. Let's say, over the years, it's just been there and a presence in my life. And when she says it today, it hits me in more profound ways when she says that she'll do it, because I'm so grateful that I have someone in my life that will do that for me. And she does it every week. Well, yeah, she mentions it very often, but she does it every week. Yeah.
So sweet, your mother. Hello, Mum, if you're listening. Sleeping quarters are transformed, and then Satish says, "I'm sincerely sorry that I've ridiculed your brother, and for the shameful way that I've been acting, I'll punish myself by not talking to Mukunda until I have progressed in the spiritual path." Now, this line feels a bit weird, doesn't it? It feels like he's unnecessarily and unknowingly he's making it harder for himself.
Yeah, this is sort of what I was indicating towards when I commented that Satish kind of does what you were mentioning some people do.
Okay, right.
When he kind of goes too far into it. Like, this is kind of because you've got Yogananda, you've got Mukunda there, who he's just witnessed can pull off the miracles. Let's say, he is in tune with the divine. However, this is his motivation. Every day, this is what anchors him into committing to doing what he goes on to do, which we know is pretty great. So I don't blame him for it. But at the same time, I can only think of, if I was him, what would I do? Which of course isn't for us to know, essentially. But yeah, I'm too I can see it both ways. But certainly, if I was him, I don't think I'd punish myself that hard.
Yeah, just this word "punish myself," I feel like that almost sounds like he's a Catholic. Like he would fit right in there. But also it means how sincere he is, right? It means that that's actually something he feels like there is a debt that he needs to repay now, and this is his way of doing that.
Yes. There's also the element that, as Chris said, that you're in the presence of Yogananda and you're willingly choosing not to benefit from being in his presence. So he's punishing himself. But as I think in last year's convocation, Brother Govindananda, I think it was, that said that guilt has no place in the spiritual path. And we talked about this in the past, but this really applies here because he's already suffered. His whole life has been without spirituality, and no doubt he would have seen how his life has been up to now, in his moments of reflection. And he is going to pay the price of that neglect. But he's then now choosing to pay it in double by not taking the grace and the blessings that are available to him in Mukunda. So Brother Govindananda said in that talk, I think he said, when you get, if you get a speeding ticket and you have to pay the fine, or a parking ticket and you have to pay the fine, you pay the amount that's due. You don't pay and then pay again double. And this is kind of what Satish is doing here.
Guruji didn't really comment on this, so I'm not sure if he would see it as a negative at all. So maybe this is just something that he mentions it here, maybe as an example of his spiritual determination rather than as a mistake. Yeah.
Good point. Determination is also especially if you can use it to propel himself and really spend longer in deeper in his practices. Yeah, good point.
And in some way that it would probably mean that Mukunda was on his mind a lot, because he was having to remind himself that he can't interact with him, So he was probably in some sort of reverence, holding Mukunda in his mind and in his heart as he was, quote unquote, punishing himself. So it's maybe a bit of a double, can you say double entendre? Meaning it's got a kind of double meaning, the word, not necessarily punishment.
True. And he says, deeply I will seek the Divine Mother from now on. Someday I must surely find her. Very nice. So the next few paragraphs are really about the Divinest Romance. It's really about the beautiful relationship now that flowers between Roma and Satish. So Mukunda says, and Paramahansa Yogananda reflects that years later, in 1936, he visited Satish in Delhi. He said, I was overjoyed to perceive that he had developed highly in self-realization and be blessed by a vision of the Divine Mother. So beautiful. He's done his work and he's received some fruits for his labor. So he said, during my stay with him, I noticed that Satish secretly spent the greater part of each night in deep meditation, taking after his father-in-law, no doubt, who used to do that, Mukunda's dad, who used to do that as well, right? And we'll come back to Mukunda's father in a little while, actually. So he says that though he was suffering from a serious ailment, he was able to, meditate this strong with this much dedication, which is very inspiring. And he also had a lot of engagements during the day in the office.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you guys were surprised that Mukunda did not initiate him into Kriya Yoga, or that he became a disciple. He probably had other techniques from another guru if it's not mentioned here. But it seems like it was an effective one.
Oh yeah, definitely. I was actually going to ask that during the reflection. Do you think he became a disciple? But it would appear that he didn't, because then usually Paramahansa Yogananda says that I initiated X, Y, Z, isn't it?
He usually does, right?
Yeah. So
what came to me was something along the lines of devotion. If Divine Mother came to him, the strength of devotion maybe required to call upon her must have been incredibly strong. So yeah, maybe it was a teaching from a guru, but potentially he was fueled through this experience that he's had through devotion for this great development of self-realization, which Guruji himself says is, one of the strongest ways to develop on the path. You have to have the devotional aspect. And it kind of strikes me here that might be at play.
Mm-hmm. So he could have just been in deep devotion
Just
states of meditation.
intense, yeah, potentially.
Yeah.
He seems that kind of a guy,
And Mukunda says, a thought came to me that my brother-in-law's lifespan would not be a long one. And Roma must have read his mind, and that must show that how in tune and what great intuitive power young Roma must have. And she says, dear brother, I am unwell and my husband is I am well and my husband is sick. Nevertheless, I want you to know that as a devoted wife, I am going to be the first one to die. It won't be long now before I pass. It could be because I've watched too many romantic Indian films, but this just blew me away. This line, and part of the reason, and we can, this is a bit morbid, isn't it? Talking about death in this way, like I'm going to go first, but she explains it a bit later. It's very beautiful and selfless why she says it. I remember my wife and I were discussing this once a few years ago, and she said she thought it was being selfless. She said, if I live longer than you, then at least you'll always have someone, a company and someone to serve you if you're old or not well. Whereas if I go first, then you're going to have to live alone. So, it's kind of a catch-22. But since reading this section of the autobiography, she has most certainly switched to no, she should follow in Roma's footsteps, and she should be the first to go. And the reason it's so moving, I think it as every we're going to read more and more paragraphs, it kind of it hits you more and more, doesn't it? It kind of punches you more and more. And whenever there's been a gap in time that I've read this, I go back, into the first, pretty much since, but it feels like it's the first time I read it, because it just moves me again and again in the same way that it did. And this is the first of a seriously beautiful set of romantic lines, and not mundane romance. It's, I think, the highest romance, and it's no wonder that Guruji is entitled one of his 3 books, The Divine Romance. Well, I don't know if he did, or the ministers after he left his body did. But yeah, she says, nevertheless, I want you to know, as a devoted Hindu wife, I am going to be the first to die. And then Mukunda says he was taken aback by her words, and yet he realized the sting of truth. I was in America when my sister died, about 18 months after her prediction. And my youngest brother, Vishnu, later gave the details. He says, it's difficult to read. Roma and Satish were in Calcutta at the time of her death, Vishnu told me. That morning, she dressed herself in her bridal finery. Why this costume? Special costume, Satish inquired. This is my last day of service to you on earth, Roma replied. It kind of melts your heart, doesn't it? And you guys being from the West, how much does it melt your heart? Or does it feel weird that? Does it feel weird that? Can you imagine Chris Barbara wearing her bridal attire on her last day? Does it feel weird to you?
To me, it did strike me that I think in Indian culture that is going to probably be a bit more attuned to the hearts of the Indians, but I think in general, no, because we've all known people to, elderly folks to lose one of their partners, and you've heard stories about how they've continued and life's not been the same, they've missed them and so on. So it's a universal story. So yes and no, but certainly with the culture that I'm familiar with, extremely independent woman, this maybe smacks a little bit of it clashes a little bit with the modern day feminist movement, let's say. It's hard to get around that to recognize that. But for me, it's just one soul talking to another. It's a beautiful story. One wants to take care of the other.
Well said. There's to understand, I suppose, the full context of this, of why this is so moving, especially for Indian readers, is you have to look at the significance of the wedding vows, and but even the SRF vows, they're very similar to the Indian wedding vows, like much more concentrated on spirituality. Obviously, the SRF ones, like for example, the Indians one will say, we'll have children and we'll raise children together best we can, that kind of thing. But the SRF ones say, and I'm paraphrasing, that we'll have children, we'll raise them, in spiritually centered life, such that, and we'll be spiritual examples, and all that kind of adds real weight to the vow, that the Indian vows. But I'll put a link to the vows and the firas. If you go to an Indian wedding, you'll see that there's a havan, or a little fire, and they'll be walking around. They'll say each vow and walk around the fire as a symbol of the sacred vow that they've just recited and that they're committed to. So I'll put a link to that on the chat. Sorry, on the description. You can have a look. So Satish said, why this special costume? And she says, it's my last day of service to you on this earth. A short time later, she had a heart attack. And as her son was rushing out for aid, she said, "Son, do not leave me. It is no use. I shall be gone before the doctor could arrive." 10 minutes later, holding the feet of her husband in reverence, Roma consciously left her body happily and without suffering.
So, question. Consciously leaving your body, this is not something that is something people do, right? So are we witnessing Mahasamadhi here, or is that something different? I mean, Guruji doesn't comment on it in this way, but it sounds a bit like it.
Agreed. Must be really, really elevated to have this, to be able to leave her, and to be able to know when her last day is going to be, to put on that dress. And some readers, Chris, your dad might be one of these, won't be able to read this section because he thinks it's a bit too morbid. Because I remember speaking to him about death, and he wasn't really willing to entertain a conversation about it. So why do we have to talk about that? This really goes into that, isn't it? It touches so many things, this section. But I feel like she's really talking so much. She's aware of when she's going to pass. And as Mike says, she consciously chooses to leave in that state. And she leaves, bowing to the feet of her husband and serving him in the last, moments is something pretty special, isn't it? Something that we can aspire to in terms of having a good death ourselves, which we will have to, an experience we will have to go through, unless our name is Mahavtar Babaji, of course. So she says, it continues, it says, Satish became very reclusive after his wife's death. Vishnu continued. One day he and I were looking at the photograph of smiling Roma. "Why do you smile?" Satish suddenly exclaimed, as though his wife were present. You think you were clever in arranging to go before me. I shall prove that you cannot long remain away from me. Soon I shall join you. It just gets more and more, doesn't it? So Paramahansa Yogananda describes here that a Hindu wife believes it is a sign of spiritual advancement if she dies before her husband, as a proof of her loyal service to him, or dying in harness.
It feels like, I don't know, maybe to you guys, if it comes across the same, but it feels like this is an example of two souls perfecting divine love for one another, and we're kind of witnessing what that looks like, where they've probably shared lives together. You know, they want to reunite after death as well. You know, this is just a consciously, then doing it consciously. You know, it seems to be quite a clean rounding of this spiritual journey that they've probably went on for many lifetimes.
Yeah, and I don't think they want to meet again just as physical forms. I think they want to. He
combine
wants to, yeah, share
something
in
like
that spiritual fellowship in Hiranya Loka or wherever they're destined to meet.
Yeah.
But Guruji does mention in that, or in that chapter, the resurrection of Sri Yukteswara, where we'll remember, meet all our past life relations one day. So this is probably what they're kind of saying here. And Vishnu says, although at this time Satish had fully recovered from his sickness and was enjoying excellent health, he died without apparent cause shortly after this strange remark before the photograph. Thus prophetically passed both my beloved sister Roma and her husband Satish, he who had been transformed at Dakshineshwar from an ordinary worldly man to a silent saint.
It's interesting that he got cured from his illness and then died anyways. Maybe that makes it more prophetic, what he said, because if he was in the dying stages of a disease, then it's maybe easier to make the announcement that I'm going to die soon. But it was like it came from a spiritual place.
Indeed. And I think that is the end of the chapter. But if you read Mejda, there's some additional details, shall we say. And Mejda, of course, is by Mukunda's brother, Sanandalal Ghosh. And he also reflects on this significant moment in their family's life. And I think the chapter was entitled Roma in Life and Death. Chris, would you like to read it? And Mike, you can finish it perhaps.
One day I went to our house at Ram Mohan Roy Road and saw that her son, Ramgati, was waiting outside in a hired carriage. He was calling her, "Come quickly, mother. The driver doesn't want to wait any longer." I went into the house and found sister in a small storeroom, dusting off photographs of father and mother. I asked her if she was planning to take them with her to the house. "No," she replied sweetly. These photographs of our dear parents, through whom we have become well established in life, have been neglected. I'm cleaning them, and then I will hang them in a proper place." Hearing her words, I was wounded at heart and felt ashamed. Truly, we had all had very blessed and happy lives only because of the love and sacrifices of our parents. I bowed my head and asked her forgiveness that we had treated their photos with disrespect. Then I told her that her son was calling her to hurry. "Let him call," she replied. "This is my last work in this house. I must finish it." I did not understand then that she would never come again. In a few days, she left her body. On the day of her demise, Roma invited Vishnu's wife and Vishnu's son-in-law, Buddha, to come in her house for dinner, to come to her house for dinner. They all dined together and enjoyed the evening. They left Roma's home about 10 p.m. At the time, Roma appeared quite well. About midnight, we received a telephone call at our house from Ramgati. He said that his mother had passed away at 11:30. We went at once to her house by car. We saw her body lying on the bed. Her face was smiling. Both her hands were resting on her chest. In one, she was holding a japamala, prayer beads. In the other, she clasped a copy of the Bhagavad Gita.
Her husband told us that when he went to bed, Roma was massaging his feet and legs to help him sleep, which he often did suddenly. She said, "I must go. Someone is calling me." She rushed from the room and went upstairs to the prayer room. Picking up her prayer beads and the Gita, she came back to her husband and bowed at his feet. In the next moment, she passed away. Roma looked as though she were sleeping peacefully. When years later, I saw the photograph of Mejda's beatific smile as he lay in state on his bed at the Self-Realization International headquarters after his Mahasamadhi, I was instantly reminded of Roma's blissful expression. Another hint here. A few days before her passing, Roma had purchased a red bordered sari, vermilion powder, and lac dye, a red coloring used to paint the feet. In India, it is customary to dress a deceased married woman in a red bordered sari, to place a spot of vermilion powder on the forehead at the place of the spiritual eye, and to put lac dye on the feet. Roma gave these items to her daughter-in-law with the words, "Oma, keep these with you. They might be needed suddenly, perhaps even late at night." Although her daughter-in-law protested, Roma insisted she hold the items in readiness. We never knew how Roma foresaw the moment of her passing. When she left us, we felt we had lost our mother for a second time. Even now, so many years later, I'm overwhelmed by the feeling of her affection. She was always tranquil, her manner mild. Seldom had I met another of equal piety. Roma was survived by her husband, one son, and 4 daughters. Yeah.
So the hint Mike was talking about again was whether she's died with Mahasamadhi in full consciousness of her.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, here Sanandalal Ghosh kind of implies that he did, because we have that picture of Paramahansa Yogananda after his Mahasamadhi lying at SRF, and has that sweet smile on his face, and apparently it looked very similar to Roma's smile. I will note here that you know how Roma kept, asked Bulma to keep these items that are used, after she's going to pass. This is a very common thing. My mum pretty much asked me, or asked my sister and myself, to do that before she left. And I remember I've got a distant aunt and uncle, and they did a pilgrimage to the Ganges and took the clothes that they were going to be cremated in with them, dipped them, and then they kept them. And then this was 20 years ago. And so one of them passed away just recently, and then that was the outfit that they had prepared. And she's got her own outfit now, and she's unfortunately suffering from cancer now. and she's pretty much got everything ready. She's already been to, the Ganga to have her clothes ready. So again, a lot of people think this is, morbid and not treating life with dignity, or treating death as, I don't know, in the right way. But in India, it's kind of accepted and acknowledged that it has to happen, and you have to prepare for it. So she doesn't. The lady who's got dying from cancer, she doesn't want the treatment. She says, "I've made all my arrangements. If you guys want to come to see me, come to see me, because I'm not going to be much longer. I'm not going to take any treatments. This is the way I was supposed to go, and this is the way I'll go," she said.
In some ways, it's fearless to talk about death like this. I think if you believe in reincarnation, it makes a lot more sense than when you believe this is your only life. Because then if you believe in reincarnation, you know there will be another one and another one. Whereas if it's your only life, then you try to hold on to this one as much as you can, and you have a lot of anxiety about death.
I heard, Frank, you've probably heard similar, that it's said by others that if you think of this life, say we get 80 years, relatively it's very short, and maybe the afterlife is significantly longer to those 80 years. Why would you not prepare for the journey? And that to me made a lot of sense. It's kind of silly, like we kind of put off this idea of preparing for that. I think primarily because most people in the West think that there isn't anything thereafter, so they don't want to face the concept that there might be. That's probably it. But yeah, it's something that we in the West are pretty woeful at discussing.
It's almost like an embarrassment. It's embarrassing to talk about it. And this Indian mentality is reflected in full force by Mukunda's father in Mejda as well, because Nalini, who's the third sister, came and told her father that at night that they were going to that Roma had passed away, and apparently this was at 11:30 during the night, and then he said, "Has the body been cremated yet?" And then they said that we told him of our brother-in-law's wish that he be able to see the body first, i.e. Mukunda's father be able to see the body first. And then he said, this is Roma's body. Yeah. So Satish wanted his father-in-law to see Roma's body before they take him to the cremation, because in India you get, as soon as you pass, you literally that day you'll get cremated. It's like an express process. Everyone knows what to do, and
in the UK it's like days, isn't it? Almost like a week or more.
Multiple weeks, such that they have people have to dress up the body as well, because if people want an open casket, and it's pretty insane. It's pretty insane. But here Mukunda's father said, "Call Satish and tell him to take the body to the crematory grounds at once. The body is nothing to me, nothing to Roma. The body is nothing to me now, nothing to Roma." And with this he walked away. We were all astonished. Sananda and Nalini says, "Father, who'd always worried when we were ill and never rested until we were well, was as stoically unemotional as he'd been when Ananta died. In both instances, there were no words of grief, nor any expression of mourning. To him, death was as expected and natural as any normal event of life." So
wow.
it's quite a lot of listeners and readers will think that is a very cold outlook, unemotional outlook on life. One that I don't, I'm more in Mukunda's father's camp, if I'm honest. And some people will say that, that means you're not dealing with grief. But whenever there's been deaths in my family, to date I haven't broken down, I guess. Let's see what, I don't know, maybe I'm suppressing grief. I'll find out in years to come, but I don't think I am.
You know, it struck me as maybe it's like this internal projection thing that we all want to be remembered. And there's something of like people worry that people simply forget about them and therefore their lives don't mean anything. You know, there's a whole sort of egotistical entanglement in that concept. As opposed to the reality is, you know, as we know in theory, is Frank, you're probably, you know, living in practice that you're connecting with souls and the soul lives on and, you know, you cherish that soul as opposed to the body. Pretty impressive, to be fair, in some way to kind of witness that. I think I'm far more emotional than the stoic, the stoic father of Mukunda.
That ends the chapter. A very wonderful chapter, very sweet, and is a really good example of what an ideal family relationship looks like. Excuse me. And also what romance means when ordinary romance is transmuted to divine love and divine romance. I think we got such wonderful examples. And in that one page where it keeps, you know, when someone's got their thumb on your pulse or heart, it's like if they keep pushing down and you feel it more and more. It's like every paragraph that Guruji was writing that I felt that divine love more and more. And it's powerful, isn't it? It's really, really powerful stuff. And in a different way to anything that's come in the autobiography to date. I know we had something similar when Mukunda described his relationship with his birth mother. But I feel like this husband and wife one is very nuanced, and and personally it hit me very, very strongly, and it continues to do so.
Going back over this chapter, it struck me just on a bit of a side note, just how artistically written and how well constructed this book is overall. This chapter's small. You know, you could kind of sort of skim through it, you know, very quickly if you're reading kind of quite quickly. But every single sentence is punchy. There's no fat. He's trimmed all the fat off it. You know, the story is just so concise. And still, like you said, Frank, you know, the you know, every paragraph has, you know, more profoundness to it. And so going over it again is it's so rich, and the quality of the storytelling is so high. So yeah, it's been really, really pleasant to read it. And I'm fascinated by these moments that Guruji gives us insight into, by the enlargement of you know, the temple and of Kali, the goddess, coming to life, the statue coming to life. Like, I'm just fascinated by these things, really. You know, I could probably waste a lot of time just chasing after, you know, how, you know, what is this? How does it work and things like that. But you know, we get just such a beautiful breakdown of it here, and he's kind of consistent through multiple stories that he gives us throughout the book. So yeah, a really beautiful, insightful chapter.
Yeah, well, some things, Chris, are only truly felt through experience. So I think any amount of intellectual pondering over that, you know, Divine Mother taking form would be.
I would say, I'll give you a bit of an insight. I'll not say exactly what the story is to the wider audience just yet. Maybe in the future, maybe. I have had an experience where I've been in meditative state with eyes open, and the things that I saw were enlarged, and I couldn't put my finger on, when I told the story, how to say that part of the story. But because of what Guruji said here, I can actually put my finger on the story of, like, closer. I could put my finger to a little bit closer as to what was happening there. So yeah, you're right. Through experience, we can know, and that's why, for me, partly probably why it's quite exciting for me to read these things.
What keeps being striking to me is how modest Mukunda is, because he obviously has like this family of saints where everyone is special and everyone is very spiritually advanced. He never even mentions it. He just like goes through those stories, and as a reader you go like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, from one moment to the next. And so they have this beautiful story of reforming Satish, and then it would have been enough if Satish would have just for the rest of his life just be a seeker. But no, he's of course also someone who is almost self-realized probably. and so is his sister. And so there is so much spiritual power in this family that probably gets never mentioned. That's probably also one reason why the book Mejda is so fascinating, because you get to see get a look behind the scenes a little bit of how things work, because there was a lot more than Guruji shared in the autobiography.
Indeed. Yeah, it's just so good to bolster your experience of the autobiography, isn't it? With sections like this about Mukunda's father and how he dealt with this, and the details about Roma and how she, spoke to others in her family about her parents, and these are really sweet details, aren't they? That Mukunda would have known about, but as Chris said, he's condensed the book. Otherwise, it'd be 10,000 pages. But the other important thing for me in this chapter is Satish shows a really good example of what true repentance means and how it's meant to transform your life. Because generally, when we look at religious repentance, it's just about punishing yourself, isn't it? Punishing yourself and making sure you don't do something. Yeah, making sure you don't do that same thing again, or healing from sins, or all that kind of stuff. But here he's really related repentance and introspection and transformed really subtly and silently. And I think is a really good example of how we should also use repentance as well. Yeah, and the next chapter is about the miraculous ways in which Mukunda receives his university degree. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. And thank you, Mike and Chris, and listeners. And hopefully Lauren will be there with us next time. But thank you very much. See you all next time. Jai Guru.
Jai Guru.
Sure.